So let's fly over the Ingwe TVET college campuses. And before we do that, I'd just like to set up why I've chosen the view that I have and how we're going to fly through. What you have in front of you is a view of the old historical kingdom of Pondoland. The great chief Faku was a guy who managed to protect his people against the invading Impi warriors. Not only that, he took in refugees, gave them land and looked after them, and he also held the various assorted chiefs in the area together in a consolidated kingdom. Very impressive guy. So I want to start off with that kind of a frame of the kingdom of the Mpondo and use that to tell some of the stories about the Ingwe TVET college. But long before Faku was around, 50, 60, 70,000 years ago, this place was actually occupied by the San. And we have strong evidence of that in some beautiful Bushman paintings or sand paintings from Maclear, which I've marked for you, which were so gorgeous they're now actually on our coat of arms. And the San were hunter-gatherers, which meant that on a daily basis they just lived their lives and had a life of both leisure, supposedly, and a very egalitarian society. But what happened was they then intersected with some herders coming through, the Khoi, and they formed various antagonistic and supportive arrangements. And then after that, the Bantu group started to come through from Western Africa who were pastoralists, who had cattle, who were growing millet, who had iron instruments, and who had a far bigger population, and slowly but surely took over this area, but not after forming various assorted alliances with the San and the Khoi in the area. And that's why a lot of the language you're going to hear the classic and which I'm going to try and pronounce as we go through. Not only that, this area, when Mfukane happened, became named No Man's Land because the people had basically left this area. And at a certain stage, Faku handed this land over to the British, who then gave it to the Griquas, who came and stayed here for a while, but very quickly sold off the pieces of land and moved somewhere else. So you've got this land being called Griqua Land East. It's got the Khoi, the San, the Mpondo. So it's got a really complex history, which you want to kind of set out as we go through it. Now, the first campus we're visiting, the Maluti campus, is only a business studies campus. So basically it offers financial management, business management, HR, office administration. You can do finance, economics and accounting, and you can also do marketing over here. And what I want to do is I want to kind of pull back now to try and give you a view of how this part of the land, the highlands, is set in contrast to the lowlands, which is the classic area where the Mpondo people were located. And we're going to pull out over the Sutu Drakensberg highlands and we're going to move across. And the key thing I want you to look out for is the Umtavuma River, which you'll see marked by the big green valleys. And that is the key boundary between, on the one side, the Eastern Cape, and on the other side, KwaZulu-Natal. Now we're flying into the Soteto campus, and we're going to do that by going over Bizana. Now Bizana, you should recognize, that's the town where Winnie Mandela was born. And it's also where Oliver Tambo grew up. And it's got a proud history of struggle, which I want to talk about in some parts. But also, crucially, it was the place where Clement Sandile Ntete grew up. And he's a great respected educator in these parts. And it's said that he was one of the founders and the initial formulators of how the Soteto campus should set itself up. Not only the Soteto campus, by the way, but Ingwe TVET College as a whole. Now, at this campus, you can do business studies, you can become a management assistant, you can do office administration. They do offer engineering. You can do civil engineering and electrical engineering over here, and also engineering and related design. And what I want to do is I want to pull away from this campus and let's pull out again over the Umtavuma River. I want to give you a sight of the full extent of the Mpondo Kingdom, which later on was converted by the apartheid government into the Transkei. The chief who took over the Transkei was nowhere near the caliber of someone like Faku. In fact, he was a nasty piece of work by the name of Botha Sekgao. What happened was he basically exploited his people, kicked them off the land, attempted to accumulate all the power for himself. And one of the projects he was initially involved in, we're going to fly over. It's the Magua Tea Plantation. In apartheid times, what they do is they try to set up these sites of development. This tea plantation was one of them. Now, it's had some success. There's an ambivalent feeling about this place. The locals who had to give up their land to make the tea plantation possible, in interviews have said that, it kind of provides jobs for the area, so they don't feel too unhappy about it. But it has had a strong history of mismanagement. It's currently under business administration. There have been attempts to help it out. It needed $150 million just a couple of years ago to sort itself out, which didn't work. And it's now under the development organization of the Eastern Cape to try and make sure that they kind of somehow recover some of the tea. You'll drink its tea. It's Lipton tea, Joko tea, all those kinds of tea. So there is tea still coming from the area. We're now moving to the Ngqongqoshe campus, and that's the name of Faku's father, who was also, he's partly started this process of consolidating Mpondo land. It's also the place where there was strong resistance to Botha Sekgao. So bad at one stage that in the 1960s, when they attempted to start the protest off, Sekgao was in a helicopter above shooting his own people. So you have this complex history which exists on the one side between the powerful good chiefs like Faku on the one side, and then the far more compromised chiefs like Sekgao. So we're now going to fly out of the Lusiki Siki campus, and we're going to fly across now and into Port St. John's, because when Faku died, basically what happened was Pondoland split between the eastern and the western half, and the river, the Umtavuma River, which we're now going to fly through, is the marking point of the difference between the two. Now, Port St. John's was historically a harbour, and the Portuguese were often using it or getting shipwrecked in this area all the way in the early 1600s. In fact, there's accounts of settlers, white settlers in the area, who decided not to try and get back to the Cape and rather stayed in the area quite happily. Lots of children kind of integrated into the local people who accepted them and made them a part of their community, very much like this area did with the people coming through from the Mfakane. So that's the reason why I'm partly telling this story, because there's a proud history of attempting some form of integration between the different people staying in the area. Now we're flying up from there into the Mount Frere Central Office. Just to note that Mount Frere has now been renamed. It's now called Kwabaka, and the Kwabaka were a people who fled the Mfakane, and under the protection of Faku were allowed to live in this area and settle in this area. Personally, I think it's a far better name than Frere, who was the British High Commissioner in this area, who was tasked to try and consolidate all of the southern African areas into one federation. And in his attempt to do that, he started waging war with all the local communities and caused a lot of suffering and destruction throughout South Africa. What did happen to him eventually was he was called back to Britain. He was fired, and before he could defend himself, he actually died. Now, the Mount Frere campus is one of the bigger campuses in the area, and it offers financial management, business management, HR, marketing, office administration. You can do finance and economics and accounting there. It also offers civil and mechanical engineering and engineering and related design. So as we're pulling out over these campuses and we're flying to the Mount Fletcher campus, just to note that I've kind of read through the strategic plans of the Ingwe TVET College, and earlier on, around about 10-15 years ago, their actual plan was not just to offer the basics of business studies on the one side and engineering on the other side. They talked far more in detail about trying to offer courses which the community actually needed. And this made a lot of sense to me. They were talking about trying to offer things like wood technology, furniture manufacturing, various enterprise courses, community conservation management, and even something like local economic development and community facilitation. And that makes sense to me, to try and identify what the community needs and then try work towards courses and qualifications which specifically speak to the needs in the area, rather than offering generic courses in business studies and engineering and then hope that somehow miraculously students will find jobs, when actually we're talking about an area which is one of the poorest in South Africa, which has an informal economy, informal settlements, often located under the local chiefs in the area, who need to identify skills which will work in the area that they're working within. But sadly, that strategic plan didn't come to fruition, and you can see from the accounts of the courses I've given that these aren't the courses which are being offered. But we're going to find with a lot of the TVET colleges in the Eastern Cape, especially in the rural areas, that they're all struggling with this issue of unemployment and poverty, and then the offering of these more generic courses which look after the students and give them some kind of education for a little while, but then release them into unemployment and a situation where they can't survive. So now I'm pulling out to try and give you a vision of where the Ingwe TVET college is located within, and I hope you can firstly see we're in the Lesotho highlands looking down over the area of great historical importance and contrasts between the San and the Khoi and the Griquas and the Bantu groups moving through, and then the Boers coming up and the British on the one side and then the Zulu coming back down. So this place of great struggle, and in between this the attempt to create some kind of calm, because out of all the areas we're going to look at in the Eastern Cape, ironically, these had the least frontier wars and the least struggle, partly because Faku was able to hold on and look after the place and hold it almost as a place of calm whilst all the other struggles were going on. And we can end off with you seeing on the one side the Umtavuma River, which creates the boundary between KZN and the Eastern Cape, and then on the other side we have the Umtavuma River, which creates the line between Eastern and Western Pondoland. And you can see that the Ingwe TVET colleges exist on the eastern side of that line.